Hello, fellow peacemaker. Welcome to episode 15 of Make Peace Not Beef. Today, we're going to talk about how marketing and design can help tackle climate change. And I have here with me the founder of Climate Designers, Marc O'Brien. Marc is a pioneer in the climate design space, and he is all about leveraging design to promote sustainability. So I'm going to let Marc introduce himself and what he's currently working on.
Lily, thanks for the invitation. It's always awesome to be able to talk about this stuff with people who care about it. I am currently in Los Angeles. I have been here since March of 2010, through the pandemic. My girlfriend lives here, but I normally live up in San Francisco. So this is very different than the city by the bay, much better weather. Although I was born in San Diego and grew up in Southern California up until 8 years old. And then my family moved to Virginia. I went to college in Virginia, graduated with an IT web development degree in 2002 when the web was very young. And me and my buddy started a web company called New Global Media, such a early 2000s web 1.0 name.
Yeah, no.
And then we dissolved that on good terms. I decided to go back to school and I got my second degree at Virginia Commonwealth University. I studied graphic design and got out in 2008. If some of your viewers can remember, 2008 was not the best time to graduate. Yeah, so that started my whole 3.5 years of being nomadic.
So what was your first job after graduation?
My professional career up until the start of the studio, The Determined, I was independent. I knew even in design school that I wanted to work in the social innovation, social impact space. At that time, finding those types of jobs were few and far between. Fortunately, I was accepted into this design program called Project M, projectmlab.com, if anyone wants to check it out. And that really exposed me to the idea of using my creative talents to create positive change in the world.
Marc, when did you become climate concerned?
Good question. I think it was around 2015. I remember being on a road trip with actually the founder of Project M, John Billenberg. We were coming back from a workshop from Utah, driving back to San Francisco, and it was like a 13-hour drive. So we had a lot of time to catch up about all things life. And it was around that time, summer of 2015, that a lot of things started to happen on the news about our environment. And I was getting more and more concerned that we weren't doing enough to right a lot of the wrongs that we've done to our world. And at the same time, as an independent, I wanted to level up my work and take on more meaningful, impactful projects. At that same time, you're hearing the IPCC reports coming out about the future of everything, of the world. And so, yeah, that was my big climate epiphany. So with my design friends specifically, we started to talk about what could we do? How can we help these efforts? On a more personal note, I was, and I still am, I'm into the outdoors. I really enjoy backpacking, hiking, camping, trail running. So there was a personal interest as well, not just a professional interest.
So the first biggest topic that we're going to discuss today is actually the powerful connection between design and climate change. Because I feel like when it comes to climate change, design is not the first thing that people gravitate toward or think of as the solution. So Marc, would you mind telling us a little bit more about Climate Designers, which you eventually founded? What was your founding story? How did you realize that there was a demand for this? And can you just let us know what Climate Designers does and what its mission is and how many people have joined us so far?
Yeah, so I can't really talk about Climate Designers without talking about my studio, The Determined. So because of that climate epiphany that I just shared with you around 2015, that was when I partnered up with my now business partner, Sarah Harrison, to create The Determined, where we wanted to use our creative talents to help climate organizations. And so we set that up and we wanted to create a collective where we can tap into these individuals if we need to. If a project calls for skills that are outside of our wheelhouse, we can just call up our buddies, hey, we need some video work, or hey, we need some illustration work. And we had a handful of collaborators in that collective, but the more projects we got under our belt, the more we started to realize that other designers were looking for creative outlets to work on climate. So fall of 2019, we came up with the idea of Climate Designers because we wanted to provide a place for designers from all walks of life to join a community, learn about climate, find projects, find jobs, so that we can get more designers on board. We launched in October 2019 with a very simple landing page. And then we had an email sign up box saying, sign up here to get notified when we launch. So it was literally an experiment to see if it was going to be sticky or not. And after all the positive responses and signups, we realized that we struck a nerve among the design community. Fast forward now, February 2021, we have lots of things on the website. So it's no longer that one landing page, but we have a podcast of our own. We are Climate Designers, where we interview designers working on climate. We have an online community of 1,200 plus members from all over the globe. We have virtual events. We have resources for design educators. A quick side note, Sarah and myself, we teach part-time at California College of the Arts. So design education is a huge passion of ours. So we have a whole initiative helping design educators bring more climate-related content into their classroom so that design students can continue to work on design projects, but perhaps more climate-focused projects. So maybe, cross our fingers, that some of them would get inspired to actually pursue this kind of work when they graduate. And we got invited to speak at AIGA's National Design Conference back in 2020. The fact that this major design association that's been around for over 100 years reached out to us and asked us to create a climate designers panel, that says a lot. That's an amazing positive signal.
Yeah. Before you go on, though, I just want you to clarify the term climate designers. What exactly is a climate designer?
Yeah. So I love answering this question because when a new person shows up to our online community, one of the first posts that they see is, what does a climate designer mean to you? And so we actually asked them what it means. And we've been collecting all the responses, and reading everyone's responses is just so cool. Everyone's interpreting it very differently, but there's a recurring thread. And if I were to answer that, it's just any creative person using their talents to take on the climate crisis. It really is just allocating your amazing talent as a designer towards this crisis that we're all facing so that others on the front lines, the scientists, researchers, nonprofits, technologists doing the hard work can achieve whatever it is that they're achieving. Because let's be honest, some of those in the science community, the climate community, their branding isn't all that great. They don't know how to market their innovative solution. Their messaging is all industry jargon. And so we as designers have an amazing set of skills that can help translate all this amazing work so that those on the front lines can achieve what they want to achieve, whether it's more funding, whether it's getting customers, finding partners or sponsors, whatever that call to action is. Any creative person, whether you're a visual designer, fashion designer, industrial, even filmmakers and illustrators, photographers, anyone in the creative space who is interested in using their talents in this space, you're a climate designer.
Got it. So let's say you could be a graphics designer, but then you're designing a logo for a company with a climate mission, or you could be someone who actually studies sustainable design and you're incorporating those sustainability principles into your design for whatever client. So either way can be interpreted as climate design.
Yeah. And here's the other thing. I'm really glad you brought that up, because what we're trying to do within the climatedesigners.org initiative is to provide a lot more resources and information so that those who might be working on projects in the climate space, they're not just pushing pixels and say, okay, cool, I'm doing my job. Like, okay, I'm helping the climate, yay. No, we want to encourage them to look more into supportive knowledge. So think behavior change, systems thinking, climate communications, environmental justice.
Got it. That's fantastic. So can you give us some examples of sustainable design in action or real life applications where climate designers can help combat climate change through design?
Yeah. So you asked me this sustainability question, and I have my 2 cents about it. So allow me to digress a little bit. The basic definition of sustainability is, and I'm getting this from Merriam-Webster, of or relating to or being a method of harvesting or using a resource so that the resource is not depleted or permanently damaged. Okay, cool. Seems fine. Seems good. But here's the thing, Lily. We've damaged a lot already. And this is the reason why we're in this mess. As designers, let's be honest, we produce waste. We extract precious resources to create a thing, and then that thing is used for X number of minutes, days, weeks, and then that thing is discarded. And then there's also a few other things. Websites, we use energy to run the web. Here's what I like to talk about, though. I look out the window and I see a world that is in need of repair. When I hear the word sustainability, I don't want to sustain what I see out in the world. That's not the world I want to live in. If we're just flatlining, neither going up or down, just sustaining where we currently are, then we're just stuck in this rut. right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm finally getting into my thing. So this is why I want to talk about this idea of regeneration.
Mm.
In contrast to sustainability, which aims to maintain a state that avoids depletion or
Right.
all that stuff, regeneration refers to restoration, renewal, and regrowth. In other words, regeneration doesn't really sustain, but improves upon a previous state. I want to get out of this ditch that we're in. And the only way of doing that is to apply this new way of thinking. It took us so long to just learn and apply sustainability into all aspects of our lives, which is great. We needed that. But we need to start now having conversation about how do we use regeneration and regenerative practices and narratives. And it's not just in the design space, but in every aspect of our lives to get us out of this ditch. So that's my thing with sustainability. I think a lot of this came about during the Industrial Revolution, during the early part of the 20th century. You know, we have Edward Bernays to thank, the godfather, the OG of public relations. He single-handedly, with his company, created this narrative of consumerism, this buy idea. And we've been sold this narrative that how we live right now is the end all be all, is the only way, is the story of success, the American dream. And I don't buy it.
Yeah.
And as designers, how can we use our skills to support other people also to create a new narrative?
Absolutely. So, Mark, you've spoken about the importance of getting designers involved, but I think something else that goes hand in hand with design is marketing, which is a powerful storytelling tool that helps to communicate to the public the rationale behind design decisions through storytelling. So, people often view climate change as a technological challenge or a social problem, but I actually think climate change can also be framed as a massive marketing challenge. So, given your experience in design and marketing, how can we market climate change in a way that engages the public and rouses them to action?
Yeah, I love this question. So I think the first thing would be just to make it resonate with the people that you're communicating towards. I have a buddy who I teach with, Eric Hyman. One of the questions he always raises to his students when it's crit time, when a student is pitching their project, his go-to question always is, make me care about the thing that you're designing, or in this case, marketing towards me. So make them care about what you're doing so that they feel motivated to take action. And I think another thing is, and I'm very passionate about this, is I think we need to do a better job of changing the narrative around climate to get away from the doom and gloom that everything's fucked, everything's getting hotter, the ice caps are melting. And sure, all that is very true, don't get me wrong, but that doesn't excite people. And so the phrase that I love using is more of a doom and gloom narrative. Imagine climate as an opportunity. Imagine it as a gift. So imagine all the new jobs, new products, new services, new systems, new approaches, new perspectives. That is cool. And from there, anything can happen. We can start not from scratch. We can obviously start from experience, but we can start with a kind of a fresh perspective to come up with something, cut ties with all the stuff in the past, all the stuff that didn't work, all the stuff that got us into this mess, and reimagine new ideas, right? A quick side note, I was taking part of an online design class. One of the last sessions, they talked about science fiction. There was a slide in there that said, organizing is science fiction. Science fiction is the attempt to create a new world of what's possible. And when you organize, in this case, climate action, you are creating science fiction. You're creating a new world. I love that. It's so cool. Yeah. Anyway, and I just love that approach. So I think if we were to shift the narrative and talk about it that way, we'll get a lot more people involved. Just a few other things. I think maybe just flat out stop using the phrase climate change in your marketing. I think because it's now politicized, it's very abstract. People tend to walk away from it. We need everyone to be aware of this. We need everyone to take action. And then with previous climate efforts, let's get rid of the polar bear on ice. Let's just get rid of the cliche images. Like, it doesn't motivate people. Like, does the graphic image of the world inside of a leaf really resonate with people? I don't think so. If it did, all those campaigns and movements back in the day would have moved the needle. And even environmentalists and climate scientists and those on the front lines, they need to be a bit more open about creating a different approach and welcome designers and other creative individuals on their team so that their hard work gets the attention it deserves.
Totally. It's funny how you brought up the polar bear drifting on melting ice, because when I first watched Inconvenient Truth, I think that was one of the scenes that really stuck with me. However, I do admit that for most people, that is just too far-fetched. Like for your average person who's watching a documentary that is showing a polar bear on ice, like what are they realistically going to do about it? There's nothing, no immediate action you can take to prevent it. So it might actually drive people into depression and despondency as opposed to really rouse them into action. So I like the point where you said we got to make them care, we got to make it relatable. So instead of talking about polar bear drifting on ice, how about let's talk about something that's more relatable to our lives, like urban design, and think about how we can reimagine transportation in cities to make them more sustainable.
Totally. Who would be against yielding more crops on their farm? Regenerative agriculture, right? Who would be against cleaner water to drink? Who would be against more jobs, well-paying jobs? Who would be against all these positive benefits that we will no doubt have if we were to all put our attention towards addressing this? So let's create campaigns that speak towards the benefits and have those benefits resonate with the people that are going to be no doubt affected by them firsthand. And one campaign in one part of the US or any other country will be very different than another part of the world. And so knowing who you're designing with, not for, just a side note, I think a lot of designers don't understand that. Designers should have the mindset of designing with, not for. You need to design with the people that you're going to be affecting, value their input, value their perspectives, observe their lives, the whole design thinking stuff. And so with all that, again, applying behavior change, effective climate communications, all the other supportive materials, you will no doubt produce a stronger climate project.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's a great point. So I guess I once read a book that said it's up to the younger generation, this coming generation, to determine the fate of humanity. So as a climate designer and as a marketing professional, how do you think we can best communicate to the younger audience who probably spend the vast majority of their time on social media? How do we get them to care?
Yeah, I have 4 nieces and nephews. So when it comes to questions like this, I always think of them first. I think just making them care about it in terms of how it's going to affect their lives. Fortunately, a lot of these young kids are climate woke. We are seeing all these amazing youth-led movements, climate movements, the strikes that are happening all over the globe. Something I think about, and I said this a lot during 2019, take one climate strike day where you have 1 million people all over the globe, and you take 1% of that 1 million, that's 10,000 young kids. I will bet you 1% of those million kids have an interest in design. So if they know that there's something like climate designers out there, that they themselves can become climate designers. 10,000 new designers focus on climate, I'm game. Yeah, but I think also too, they're smart. They have Google in their pockets. They are connected. They have friends both down the block, but also around the world. They're aware of what's going on, and they're not happy with the future that they're going to no doubt adopt. And so I think because they're pissed off, because they are not guaranteed a long future like their grandparents had, I think that pissed offness is a little bit of fuel that they're using to speak up. And seeing all these young people at the UN speaking up or on these massive stages with, obviously there's Greta, who's a perfect example, but there's lots of other Gretas out there. And so if they're doing it, of course, their peers are going to look at them and say, oh, wow, this is important. And it would be interesting to see what companies do, what products and services, how they adapt to speak to this generation. On a related note, it's a shame that we as a society accept the news media and social media as a doom and gloom narrative where they only talk about the negative. I want to see more of who's doing the good work. Yeah. You have Project Drawdown, you have some of these, but you kind of have to be in the know to know about these projects and these organizations doing the good work, because they're not being presented in mass media outlets. So it's a shame. I would love to see that change. But yeah, so I think Drawdown is great. Design Science Studio is great. So there are organizations and initiatives out there doing that. I want to support them. I want to make them as well known as a Hollywood movie or Jay-Z or LeBron James. I want to make them be at that celebrity status. That's one thing I share with my students. I teach part-time at CCA, and I teach a climate designers class actually. And one of the prompts I give them is, when it comes to one of their projects, is I want you to create a solution or an approach that will elevate scientists and researchers and those on the front lines to be at that celebrity level. I want them on billboards. I want them to have their own TV channel. I want people to wear t-shirts with their face on it. Like I want them, yeah. And we need to celebrate those people and we need to support them because they're only going to inspire more people to do that. How many young kids want to be movie stars or musicians versus how many young kids want to be scientists and environmentalists?
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, I think nowadays we're starting to see an overlap between rappers, artists, musicians, actors, and environmentalists.
Oh, yeah.
Right? A lot of them are, like Leonardo DiCaprio himself is
yep.
an environmentalist. And we are definitely seeing more and more overlap because, and also, I'm not sure if you've ever, did you hear Joaquin Phoenix, his Oscar speech?
Oh, yeah.
This year, where he spoke about the connection between the dairy industry and animal brutality. And so I do think there are a lot of very socially conscious artists out there, but you're right. We need to bring them to the forefront and really shed light on them and make sure that they're heard.
Yeah, if you Google New York Times pop music climate change, there's been at least 3, maybe even more articles from various writers of the New York Times highlighting the fact that more mainstream musicians are talking about climate through their songs and even some through their whole albums. So yeah, I think you're right. I want to acknowledge that there are people doing this kind of work. So how do we get more of them?
Oh, 100%. We definitely need more of them. And I guess, are you guys also partnering with celebrities or people who are already established in the space and using their influence?
Yeah, I would love to. I definitely would. I think once we get a bit more of a groundswell and we get a little bit more of a presence and a foundation, I think there's definitely amazing possibilities and opportunities to bring that on. I would love to talk to musicians and artists and celebrities.
Absolutely. And here's just another idea that I just thought of literally just now. So instead of dispatching these climate designers into working for solar energy companies or like Beyond Meat or companies that are already environmentally conscious, why not first educate them and embed them into all sorts of industries like the music industry, the education industry, and regular industries, and then just let them shine.
Totally. Yeah. I feel like it's going to take an all hands on deck approach. It's going to take a top down, bottom up, where you'll have designers who are 100% focused on climate like I am, who this is my job, but you also have designers who will just stay working at their in-house design company or creative studio, whatever. And that's totally fine too. If you're a designer at Twitter and you want to stay at Twitter, awesome. But what can you bring into your company that can move the needle within Twitter on how they show up to climate? And also too, just a quick little thing, I'm also a firm believer that designers make great entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And so I tell my students, look at Airbnb, Kickstarter, Pinterest, they're all founded or co-founded by designers. And so mash up your creative skills with a little bit of business acumen and climate. That is a badass combo.
You're unstoppable. I agree, because entrepreneurs are at its core, they're creatives. You're creating something that doesn't already exist. That goes hand in hand with design. I totally agree. And to your point, if these designers kept their job at Pinterest, at Twitter, at Facebook, I think if anything, they can make an even greater impact. Because now they're taking these sustainability principles back into these behemoths that have a huge global footprint.
Yeah, we need them on the inside and out.
That's it. We need them everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Infiltrating into every single sector and company possible. Definitely. So now I want to take the discussion to speak more broadly about the social problems that we are experiencing as a society today that are connected to design. So for example, we live in a world that promotes fast fashion, fast food, gadget upgrades every other month, promoting the cycle of overproduction and overconsumption. And we're constantly chasing after the next generation of stuff because consumers are hungry. So the lifespan of a product ends up being significantly shortened. So how should we curb consumers' insatiable appetite for instant gratification that comes with buying, and instead recondition these consumers to opt for good design that lasts? So how can designers help shape public appetite through sustainable design?
Yeah, that's a meaty question. I'm going to answer that in a few ways, as I tend to answer these big, gnarly questions. So the designer's role is to not bullshit the consumer. We've heard of greenwashing.
Yeah.
So let's just acknowledge that our consumers now, especially younger consumers, they're smart, they're woke in all aspects of society. And so they can sniff out an inauthentic brand. And so let's acknowledge that. And let's not even go there ever again. All right. And I think maybe it's also just not up to the consumer and the designer, but why not have the CEOs have a hard look at themselves and do some soul searching and think about their footprint, what they're doing, and how they can recalibrate their company from the ground up to ensure that all of what they're doing is all for the right reasons. And so if that happens, then where do designers within that company step in? What are the amazing questions that they can ask? What are the processes that they know that they can run through their company so that when it's time for them to do 2.0 version of that company, they're already setting themselves up for success. Now, I think there's lots of different touch points, right? Upstream and downstream. So on downstream, you have the consumer. Let's market towards them where it's not BS and inauthentic. You also can go upstream and go to the companies themselves. And then I think it's also a matter of let's also just stop marketing bullshit products and gadgets to begin with. Do we need another on-demand something or another? Do we need another version of this thing if it just has one extra doohickey?
Exactly.
And I feel like because of how we have created that narrative, as I talked about a few minutes ago, we as individuals think that we need to have all this stuff to be happy and live a comfortable life. And sure, some products do in fact make our lives easier. And I'm all about that, don't get me wrong. But I feel like it's also an opportunity for designers to help humans as a whole to rewrite our narrative. And so I think we've just gotten our priorities out of order.
Yeah.
And special thanks to those up at the top who control those levers and have created that false narrative, as I mentioned before, the consumerism, the buy stuff. And I think we as designers have a responsibility to speak up and say, hey, person at the top, actually, I don't want to be a part of this. What about if we do it this way? So again, we can, as one of our amazing tools in our toolkit, we have the ability to visualize a better future. So why not just speak up? Mike Montero, who's a designer in San Francisco, wrote a book called Ruined by Design. I highly recommend it. He talks a bit more about how designers show up in the tech industry, but I feel like you can read that book and apply it to the climate space. And so I think designers are gatekeepers, as what Mike mentions in the book. And so we have a responsibility to say no or ask why. And so maybe to address your question, Lily, would be if we can do our best as designers to limit the amount of crap that is produced in the world, to limit all of that before it even gets out of the front door, I think that's an amazing first step. And then once it gets out there, what can we do to encourage people to move away from this buy mentality? So I don't think there's a single answer to that. I think it's going to take a lot of people to do that. It all has to work in sync. And that's one of the biggest challenges with climate at a bigger level, is that it's going to take lots of different countries, lots of different governments to move fast and all at the same time. So this is a big, gnarly challenge that no one climate solution or approach is going to be the end all be all. There's a kind of a tired phrase in the climate space. It's not going to take a silver bullet, but a silver buckshot to address this. We need to reimagine our narrative first before we can even address climate. And so what does that look like? How do we show up in the world? Climate change is really just a symptom of who we are as individuals. Yeah. And so it's going to be hard to address this, but I have hope. That was a long answer to that question, but.
So you talked about how we all need to collaborate together in order to solve this massive, gnarly challenge. Like you said, designers alone cannot be the solution. And I totally agree with that. I was just thinking I was reading up maybe a few years ago about modular design and how I think Samsung was doing this. So instead of buying a new phone, you can just upgrade parts of it instead of having to get a new one. Because as we all know, like Apple comes out with a new iPhone every year. You change a tiny part of the operating system, or adding a button, or making the home button round instead of square. And then you push out a new generation of iPhones, and people don't want the old ones. And it's...
Yeah, to bring this up to listeners, if you don't know what perceived obsolescence and planned obsolescence is, I highly recommend you looking that up. So planned obsolescence, Lily, is basically what you're talking about, where companies create a new thing just to create the new thing to make more money off of that new thing. So it makes the previous thing obsolete. And then perceived obsolescence is really just changing the style of something so that if you don't have that new thing, you at the social level just don't look cool. A great video that I watched way back when, I think this was 2004, was The Story of Stuff by Annie Leonard. It was about a 20-minute long video. Highly recommend it. You can still find it on YouTube. She goes over this idea of this supply chain and consumerism. And she's a badass, and now she's the ED of Greenpeace. But yeah, and I think also designers need to think about how to, when you're creating something new, make it look normal. and what I mean by that is, think of Prius versus Tesla. People might not want the latest and greatest thing if it looks too far-fetched. And also too, don't sacrifice quality. So you're seeing this a lot with cars, with these automotive industry companies that are creating these EV vehicles. No one wants to sacrifice range, so they're trying to make a battery last as long as a full tank. People don't want to sacrifice their comfort, their day-to-day life. And so if designers can create objects in a way that doesn't allow that to happen, I think we'll get more people to maybe splurge an extra $5 or $1, if it's a small object, obviously, to buy that more sustainable design or object coming from higher quality materials and a more ethical supply chain. So I think designers can do that. So yeah, don't sacrifice function or form or quality for these alternative materials. Make it just look and feel normal, and then slowly iterate and go from there.
Yeah, no, great point about planned and perceived obsolescence, by the way. I think that's so important because a lot of people don't know that this is actually part of the company's marketing strategy. Like they purposely make this item obsolete. So you have to buy the next, like Apple stops making software updates to, let's say if you have iPhone 6s, right? They're like, you have to get our latest version. We're not supporting it anymore. But I guess on some level, there has to be some economic reordering because so many companies, this is how they make profit. They profit from a continuous stream of products and churning out new goods every year because they're like, we got to feed all of our employees. If we stop using new generation of goods, how is our company going to survive?
Ooh, now you're getting into capitalism.
Yes, okay, for another day.
That's maybe another podcast. Yeah. I think capitalism at a small scale, how it was intended to be, was okay, but it was never meant to be this big.
That's true.
And so I think that's where we shot ourselves in the foot. And so, sure, yeah, I totally get it. Companies have to pay their employees. They have to make money, so they have to churn out more stuff. And I highly recommend watching the documentary, The Century of the Self, that basically focuses on Edward Bernays and how he helped create this capitalistic society. He's the nephew of Sigmund Freud, if that says anything. So he took a lot of what his uncle developed and got from his work and applied it to public relations and corporations and consumerism and things like that. Yeah, I'm excited when I see people, and some of them are my friends actually, when I see people reimagining economic systems, that's, now we're talking. So moving away from capitalism and going more towards a shared community, shared economy, exactly, circular economy, that's some exciting stuff. So that's something I'm really paying attention to now.
I love the analogy where you talked about how we should reimagine climate change as the dawn of a new era, as opposed to this massive existential barrier. It could be, but
Sure.
help us to think of it that way. So might as well take this opportunity to regenerate and rethink how we should design the world. Yeah, thank you so much, Marc, for sharing with us your insights and your experiences working as a designer. And I'm sure after this podcast, more designers will want to look up climate designers and want to be part of the community because this is a tremendously noble mission. But I think it's also very exciting, and that designers would want to be a part of it. Marc, would you mind sharing your social media and how can people get involved with climate designers? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so if you're a designer who is wanting to step up and take climate action, check out climatedesigners.org. We're on Instagram, we have Twitter. And yeah, if you're a climate organization, check out thedetermine.co. That's my company. We help organizations on the front lines with this kind of work. If you're interested in seeing my work, you can check out my old work at marcobrien.net.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marc, for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lily. This was fun.
And thank you, listeners. Don't forget to tune into our next episode. I'll see you later.